How do we change the flows of capital so that they align with the flows of life? How do we shift financial flows to bend the curve of nature loss? How do we invest our money while it is still worth something?
Hello, and welcome to Learning Lab. This is Ma Earth's online community where we share tools, skills, and stories in service of planetary health and regeneration. I am Sophia Rockland. I am our facilitator and our host, and we've been having conversations about ecological regeneration, ranging from biochar to seed genetics to indigenous rights of nature. And today we're exploring catalyzing bioregional economies with Samantha Power. Samantha really needs little introduction, but for the purpose of this session, I'll share that she is the director of the BioFi project and co-author of Bioregional Financing Facilities. She is a regenerative economist that's been really exploring how small place-based action can be supported through innovative financial institutions following the wisdom of bioregionalism or bioregioning. If you don't know what that means, stick around. Sam is going to share in her presentation. But just so you know where we're going, you can stick around for the end of the session where live audiences who join us participate in a Q&A session. So if you would like to join us live for Learning Lab, you can find a link in today's show notes in our Luma calendar. If you also have an idea for a session on regeneration that you would like to explore, maybe it's kelp farming, maybe it's organic pesticides, whatever it may be, write to community@maearth.com. And we can try to find a great teacher to support this learning environment. Okay, so I'm going to let Sam get started in a second, but before I do, I wanted to do a little reading because I have enjoyed weaving in the words of the kind of poetic approaches to ecological thinking. So I'm going to read something by Wendell Berry, who is a Kentucky-based ecologist, farmer, poet, author, activist, academic, etc. And he wrote this piece it's a manifesto called the Mad Farmer Liberation Front. And this is a little portion of it. So, ask the questions that have no answers. Invest in the millennium. Plant sequoias. Say that your main crop is the forest that you did not plant, that you will not live to harvest. Say that the leaves are harvested when they have rotted into mold. Call that profit. Prophecy such returns. So, in the spirit of the sequoias and supporting the work that lives many, many generations onward, I'd love to introduce you all to Samantha Power. Samantha, take it away.
Beautiful, Sophia. Thank you so much for that. Okay, wow. So honored to be here with all of you today. Thanks for tuning in. And I am trying to begin talks that I give these days with my why. Why share this with you today? Why do this work? And my why is life on this sacred garden planet. Thomas Berry often called it that we get to call home. And I believe that the body of work that is bioregionalism has a lot that can support us in being better stewards of life. So I'll be holding that today and what I share, and I ask all of you to hold that with me. So we'll be talking about catalyzing bioregional economy, yes, but as Sophia mentioned, there was also a request to share a little bit about the bioregional movement and bioregionalism more broadly, its history, how it's evolving, what's happening in this moment, So I'll share just a taste of that. There's so much that could be shared, but I did my best to condense some key points that I hope can spark discussion that we can have in the Q&A. And then I'll move into talking a little bit about the body of work of the BioFi project, bioregional finance, and then we'll move into how that goes into broader bioregional economics. So I'll begin with asking the question, what the heck is the bioregion? So in its simplest form, bioregion means life place. And here you can see a map of North America with varying degrees of granularity in terms of its bioregions, what are also sometimes called ecoregions, the smaller ways to divide these geographic areas according to their geology, ecology, and often these maps are drawn to incorporate human culture. So I like to think about hard lines, geological lines, mountain ranges and rivers and canyons, soft lines, ecological lines. Where does the meadow meet the forest? Where does the forest meet the beach or the mangrove? And human lines, cultural lines. Where do people speak a certain language or have a certain accent? And then where does that intersect with people that speak historically a different language, or even today have a very different accent or use very different spices in their food? And all of these together are one integrated way of looking at and understanding our place and really coming to be more a part of that place. So that's kind of how I think about what a bioregion is. There are a long line of bioregionalists that have come before me that have built a body of work making the case for bioregions as the natural units of place-based regeneration. So if it's our work in this moment to regenerate our places, to regenerate our earth, we need to be paying attention to bioregions, I would argue. So why is it particularly useful to look at the world through this lens at this moment? And I feel that as the legitimacy and solidity of the political structures that are underpinning the nation state, which are the maps that we're usually looking at, are starting to crumble, bioregions and this way of thinking about governing and designing economies is becoming more and more relevant. So, what is bioregionalism? It's a philosophy that advocates for societies to be organized around biocultural regions or bioregions, where economic activity, ecological management, and governance align with the region's natural systems and cultures. And a bioregional writer from the 70s and 80s, Mitchell Tamashaw, says bioregionalism emerges as a response to a formidable power relations of global political economy. More than an alternative framework for governance, it represents a profound cultural vision addressing moral, aesthetic, and even spiritual concerns. And many bioregionalists have suggested that bioregionalism is an approach of devolution rather than revolution that invites us to overgrow rather than overthrow the systems that we're seeking to change. And it's important to say that, in my view, bioregionalism emerged into 1960s North America thanks to the deep determination of Native peoples of this continent and Indigenous peoples around the world, and their commitment to persisting and living out and generously sharing the original instructions that they had received for being a keystone species. And those of us that are deeply embedded in modernity, many of us from all different ethnic backgrounds and nationalities, raised within the myth of separation, as it's often referred to. So, this kind of mechanistic reductionist worldview that separates humans from the rest of life. Um, for us, bioregionalism offers a kind of ontological, epistemological, and ethical U turn where we can choose to return to a simpler, more beautiful, life aligned way of living, governing, and structuring our economies. So that's kind of how I understand it and how it's meeting the context of this moment. And there are some principles of bioregionalism that we at the BioFi project have identified. There could certainly be many more, but here are some that have been helpful in our work. And those include alignment with living systems principles and indigenous wisdom, holism and interconnectedness, looking at systems as fractal and nested, but always interconnected, integration of human and more than human communities, where we stop seeing the more than human life as something we have dominion over, but rather just a part of our family and a part of our communities where we live. Place-based identity and responsibility, really feeling a part of your place again and feeling responsibility for taking care of that place, not depending on the government to make sure you have clean water or a healthy forest. And local community self-reliance, really learning to have the skills to take care of ourselves and each other and our places in a deeper way than many of us have right now. It involves culture and practices of commoning, regeneration, and stewardship, participatory democracy. And for me, this is different than how many people think of representative democracy in the governance system that we have, for example, in the United States today. But really a small d democracy that is very decentralized and involves engagement in how we make decisions and the harvesting of collective intelligence in that decision making. Bioregional cooperative economics, designing economies that fit within the boundaries of our place and serve those places and are cooperatively owned rather than owned by centralized profit maximizing structures. And then last is the application of what E.F. Schumacher called appropriate technology. And that is everything from cultural, governance, and coordination technologies to digital technologies, including the ones that Ma Earth is developing. So I'll move to saying a bit about the bioregional movement and why it's resurging right now. I will first say that many people engaged in this work are very deep into etymology. And so there are a number of folks working in the bioregional space that prefer the word bioregioning to bioregionalism. They believe that um, turning these words into nouns rather than verbs takes us out of the action and the process of doing it. And I appreciate that. So bioregioning could be one way to talk about this work. And then I was on a call with Daniel Christian Wall last week or the week before, and he was telling me he really doesn't like the word movement. And there are other folks in this space too that really don't like the word movement. So please hold the words that I'm using today lightly. Daniel invited us to think about a pattern rather than a movement that we're all coming into, and it's more foundational than a movement. It doesn't have a beginning or an end. And it's accessible to all of us at any time. So that's just a bit of context. So that being said, the early bioregional movement began in the late 60s and early 70s together with the Back to the Land movement. And it really started in North America. And folks that grew up in urban and suburban areas were moving to rural areas. And bioregionalism emerged as an approach that allowed them to pursue deep reinhabitation of the land that many of them were craving. And many of these people were coming from families that had been separated from land based cultures for generations. So, bioregionalism was a way of rediscovering that culture again. And it connected Indigenous and non Indigenous folks in Mexico, the United States, and Canada. In Mexico, in particular, it was deeply connected to the movement to stop GMO corn from coming into Mexico. So the bioregionalists were really protecting their ancestral foodways and preventing their corn from being kind of um, taken over by these GMOs that were being put on them through trade agreements and lots of corporate and political pressure. And for the most part, that movement has been really successful. And in the US in 1980, an activity called bioregional congressing started. So this was really congressing as a verb, as an act designed to support communities to discover the muscles for self governance again and to build coordination capacities to engage in local decision making and planning. And my dear friend and mentor, David Hankey, who's in the green t shirt here in the picture in the middle, started the first bioregional congress in southern Missouri in the Ozarks, where he moved as part of the Back to the Land movement. And he hosted the first Ozark Area Community Congress in 1980. Tyler, my partner Tyler, and I got to go to the 45th one a couple of years ago, and it's an amazing event. You can learn more about it on their website. They still have it every year. And it's really a space for people to come together and support local resilience, support local food and medicine systems. There have been banking experiments and currency experiments that have came out of this. And ultimately, it led to continental bioregional congresses that were happening across Turtle Island or North America. And these first began in the early 80s, and they were happening pretty regularly until the mid 90s. And after that, there were a couple more, but the momentum started to dissipate after that. Um, there, there are a variety of reasons why the movement kind of went underground. Here are some reasons that I think are partially to blame. There are probably many more, and indeed, I think we need more literature, kind of looking at what happened. But certainly, the Reagan era political climate just created this supercharged neoliberal globalization and localization movements, and the bioregional movement in particular just weren't as popular for a while. Environmentalism was professionalized. You started to see the rise of big environmental NGOs, and it was less kind of land-based people leading that work. And it was people in big cities often that were driving those agendas. The movement fragmented, people moved to different places. I remember hearing Gary Schneider would tell people that the best thing they could do for the movement was to go home, to go to their places. And yes, there's something in that, but perhaps when people left kind of cultural centers where they were holding this energy together and dispersed, the power kind of dissipated in some places. And the climate movement really shifted the scale. People started really thinking globally about how to stop climate change. And there was less emphasis on the local bioregional action and identity. But the bioregional movement is back. It's back in a big way. And we're hearing people all the time talk about how the future is bioregional. And I'd like to suggest that, just like the past, for many millennia, the land on this earth, its waterways were governed in a bioregional fashion by the indigenous peoples living there. And indeed, there were cultures that sustained on that land when it was governed in this way. That I'm very excited about the resurging bioregional movement. And later this year, we are getting the first bioregional Congress since 2009. Turtle Island Bioregional Congress 11, TIBC. They have a website. Check it out. Registration will be opening at the beginning of April. There's going to be an incredible lineup of speakers, but there's also going to be a lot of open space and just opportunity for people to find each other and organize sessions around the issues that matter in their place. So this will be happening in Cascadia in Oregon. And the organizers of the Congress, Carrie Crisp and my friend Louis Fox, put out an incredible short film. It's less than 10 minutes about the resurging bioregional movement. So I'm sure Sophia can send that out in the post session materials, but I highly recommend checking it out. It's really inspiring. Okay, so that's a little bit about the bioregional movement. I guess I also want to say that I believe after the 2008 financial crash and the Occupy Wall Street movement, there was an awareness that really strengthened about how we are engaged in a completely suicidal economic system and how that system is captured. And so I think that has really contributed to the movement resurging and to economics and finance being much more central in the movement this time around. So I'll share a little bit now about how I came to bioregionalism and how economics and finance has been my entry point there. And I'll say that there are many things that have been pulling me in this direction for a long time. That probably my earth listening practice is the deepest. I have been paying attention, like all of you, to the increasingly common and large fires, including in my beloved state of California, floods. This was the highway just a few miles from where I'm sitting at my parents' house right now. Just a few years ago, after a hurricane hit Houston, and the habitat loss of the species that I love. And this was an orangutan that I got to know a little bit in Borneo more than a decade ago, and I was really activated by the destruction of the forests there in Indonesia for the few years that I was living in Southeast Asia. So these trends that are unfolding led me to some questions that have been driving my work since I was a graduate student. How do we change the flows of capital so that they align with the flows of life? How do we shift financial flows to bend the curve of nature loss? How do we invest our money while it is still worth something? And these questions led me to doing some work for a while in Washington, D.C., where I was working much more from the top down, including at the US Treasury Department, and 5 years at the World Bank, where I was working with the Convention on Biological Diversity, the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, a group of 85 finance ministries that were trying to change their fiscal policies to bend the curve of nature loss, as you see in this graph here, which was often featured in many of the reports that I was writing. A group of more than 100 central banks that were becoming aware of how the economy was destroying the biosphere and how the biosphere is the basis of the economy. And even the G20, I was working with the Sustainable Finance Working Group there. And while I was inspired by the goals of these organizations and targets that were set in agreements like the Kunming-Montreal Agreement that we got in 2022. I saw the approach that multilaterals, governments, and financial institutions were taking to try to realize regeneration is not leading to meaningful amounts of money reaching on the ground projects. And that indeed, those projects were often applying for small single year grants with burdensome administrative requirements. And I saw money pooling that wanted to support nature regeneration, money that we were helping to catalyze through the reports that we were writing. And yet it was stuck. And the most urgent and critical projects I saw coming across my desk were almost always underfunded. And the world is not short in money. I think we all know that pretty well. What is much more scarce, in my opinion, is people with the wisdom on how to collectively govern commons and to do so with reverence. And so, after lots of reports and big meetings that all promised to be monumental, and even a brief stint at an asset manager, I decided that the true transformation I wanted to see, and indeed the transformation I believe is needed to protect life on this planet, wasn't going to happen from the top down. And I saw a gap between capital holders and place-based land stewards around the world, a gap in connectivity where many regenerative projects are small scale, grassroots, and eligible to funders, including the funders holding the largest pools of capital, a gap in socio-ecological integrity, where current financing approaches often perpetuate the extractive processes and power structures that are driving our ecological crisis. And critically, a gap in worldview and language, where capital is rarely deployed in alignment with a living systems approach that sees the earth as a living, breathing, interconnected, and sacred organism. And so I started dreaming into how we might close this gap. And I had a vision for a new layer of financial institutions that could serve as connective tissue between increasingly centralized and globalized pools of capital and the very place-based land and cultural stewards around the world that are caring for and regenerating the earth. And we called these bioregional financing facilities. And I started writing about this in a book that I called Bioregional Financing Facilities, Reimagining Finance to Regenerate Our Planet. And I invited my co-author, Leon Seafield from Dark Matter Labs and Bioregional Weaving Labs to join me in writing this book. And it came out in June 2024, and it's available for free on our website in both English and Spanish. And in the process, we got input from so many people around the world already engaged in BioFi aligned work. And we wrote a dozen case studies on their work that are available in the book and as standalone publications on our website. And we started to lay out what we saw in a framework. So bioregional financing facilities, or BFFs, have three objectives. They drive decentralization of financial resource governance, so those decisions can be made with the intelligence of place as a part of those decisions. They organize synergistic portfolios of projects. So projects aren't all fundraising individually, but there are groups of them that are working together to regenerate entire watersheds or entire forests. And third, they aim to catalyze the transition to a bioregional economy. So the BFF isn't focused on just the success of one individual business, but rather every dollar that is deployed is meant to support the transition to an economy that over time is regenerative. Bioregional financing facilities have 12 attributes, and I won't go through all of them, but there's a lot of alignment with the principles of bioregionalism that I laid out earlier. And again, this is available on our website. And there are 4 templates for bioregional financing facilities that we lay out in the book. They generate what we refer to as multi-capital returns. So we're not just interested in financial returns, but returns to clean air, clean water, healthy, alive food, safe and clean shelter, thriving land, waterways, and seascapes, life aligned culture, stewardship, self sufficiency, anti fragility, and economic benefits and financial returns as part of that overall picture. And in June 2024, when we launched the book, we also launched the BioFi project, which is a think and do tank that supports bioregions to design, create, capitalize, implement, and evolve these BFFs. And we're supporting teams across the Americas to create these within our values framework, which is being practical, being in right relationship, attempting very humble listening in our work, and engaging creativity. And we really think that this moment requires a lot more creativity than we've seen in economics and finance to date. And holism, really looking at each bioregion, each town as nested in bigger wholes that it is connected to. And on the right here, you can see that we're working fractally within systems. So we see finance as a part of broader economies, and economies serving societies, and societies serving the earth and embedded in the biosphere. And ultimately, all of this as a part of an evolutionary process happening across the universe. And we try to hold all of that in the design work that we do. And it's important to say that one of the things that we aim to do with bioregional financing facilities is to realize what David Bollier and Natasha Holst from the Schumacher Center for New Economics call transvestment. And I'll just read quickly an excerpt from an excellent essay on transvestment that David and Natasha wrote. They say that because nature and modern economics have very different ontological and operational dynamics, there's a critical need for intermediary bodies for investment to bridge and respectfully navigate those differences. It's also important to name the value shift that occurs when money is transferred from capitalist circuits of value to common stewarded regimes of value and meaning. And David and Natasha call this transvestment to indicate that investment in the latter value regime has very different logics than that of the conventional capitalist investment. And we aim to design BFFs that really try to do this in a practical way. So the BFFs become a sort of membrane where you can see here they're taking in money that often has been generated through destructive and extractive means, and they're using it to serve regeneration. So BFFs aim to catalyze the transition to a bioregional economy, and I'm going to speak briefly about what that looks like at a broader scale. So we see the bioregional economy as a living flow. It reconnects people to ways of living that regenerate. It connects them to flows of care to and from a place, and to technologies that enable those flows. The bioregional economy also invites us to spiritually, culturally, ecologically, and economically re-inhabit our place. And over time, we see the bioregional economy exhibiting more of these qualities, becoming more circular, more local, even though it will likely always be connected to other bioregions and what they're offering. That you have more of what you need for the people there to be well coming from the place itself within the bioregional boundaries, the bioregional carrying capacity of that place. Um, they are symbiotic in the relationship between rural areas and cities. They are regenerative, they're commons based, and they often have intentionally structured markets. So, not markets that are are just kind of free for all, but markets with purposes to serve the place and are designed and regulated for that function. And there are several transition pathways to creating these bioregional economies that we've observed in the teams that we work with are really powerful entry points. These include working on the food system and transitioning the food system, the building system, creating affordable housing and natural built structures for people to live in, the energy system, the fiber system. Land ownership is like a really critical one that I know some folks in the Earth ecosystem are really doing some amazing innovation around. The educational system, we need to start to see economies as having a purpose and creating them that way. Healthcare, of course, if people are healthy, they're much more able to participate in this work. Cultural and spiritual transformation are also really critical entry points. So, what does all of this look like in practice? Um, it is fractal. So, there are practices that can be done at the personal or household scale, including growing our own food and medicine, mending, repairing, reusing, and stepping out of a culture of disposability, observing nature's cycles and aligning our rhythms with our place, building, living, and working in structures made from natural and local materials, and prioritizing presence, relationality, and creativity. At the neighborhood or small watershed scale, some of these practices are shared land stewardship, shared tool libraries, maker spaces, commercial kitchens, art studios, business services, cooperatively owned infrastructure, workshops, apprenticeships, workforce training, all rooted in the regenerative economy. Community rooted education and childcare, nourishing a life aligned culture, healing centered spaces, and local repair and craft guilds. And then at the bioregional scale, that's where we really start to see some of these practices influencing bigger systems. So, cooperatively owned food and medicine systems, circular fiber and building material economies, healing networks and service to collective wellness, governance structures that center holistic well being of all, a culture of celebration and repair, including bioregional festivals, right? The passage ceremonies and stewardship of sacred commons. And of course, infrastructure for mutual aid and resilience, which is there and thriving in so many communities, urban and rural, all around the world. And some tools, interventions, and experiments that we've identified can be really catalytic entry points to working on bioregional economic transition are bioregional financing facilities, which I spoke about a bit, also bioregional hubs, which are a little bit more focused on kind of learning and land stewardship and tool sharing and in-person education. Mutual credit programs. Will Reddit from Grassroots Economics is doing some incredible writing on this if you're curious to learn more about that. Alternative currencies and several of the bioregions that we're working in have local currencies that they're trying to use to become a bigger part of keeping value circulating locally within their bioregion. Bioregional regeneration credits or eco credits. A couple of the teams we're working with are designing and creating these. Community land trusts, legal structures for sovereign land and land return programs, regenerative economic zones where you have special economic zoning that only allows regenerative activities to take place in a particular jurisdiction. Is something we're hoping to get engaged in soon. Cooperative ownership structures, import replacement, mutual aid networks, and gift economy hub. So those are some of the things we're excited about. I was going to say a little bit more about a couple of the BFFs we've been working with, but I want to have time for Q&A. So um, you can learn more about that on our website. I will just say if you're interested to check out more of the resources that we have available on our work, we have the BioFi resource garden available on our website that we are adding to all the time. And we have a BioFi community of practice. There's a group of 750 plus people from around the world hanging out on Hilo, sharing resources, asking questions. We have community calls once a month. Sometimes we gather in person and it's pretty fun. And I'll just in closing say that we believe that bioregions are the right scale, bioregional economies are the right context, and bioregionalism is the right practice for developing and distributing the appropriate technologies that can catch us in periods of disruption and serve as the soil from which life affirming cultures grow. And I'm excited to hear how this lands with our audience here.
Thank you so much, Sam. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Hello, great, awesome. Well, thank you again. This is a great time to include any kind of questions, reflections in the chat. I will begin with moderator's privilege. I felt my heart was sad when you skipped through the the current alliances and collaborations.
Sure.
Would you mind just sharing a little bit about like what has obviously from this imaginal realm drawing upon communities of practice to like today, like what has your first forays in actually implementing and creating bioregional financing facilities looked like so
Mm.
far?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Sophia. You ran a learning and design journey last year with 22 teams from across the Americas. So we learned so much in terms of the diversity of people that are drawn to this work. And many of them saying, I was getting ready to start trying to do something like this. And, the book and the cultivator came along at just the right time. So many people are having like a similar realization, and it's been really supportive for all of us to have community in that and to be able to learn out loud and together. So one of the things I think we're learning is like the importance of co-learning. We're also learning about the diversity of bioregions and therefore of bioregional financing facilities. It's definitely not a copy and paste approach. And the work is really challenging and really inspiring. And we're learning a lot about legal structures and governance structures and uh, all the different manifestations of regenerative activity that are already underway and how that can inform the story of the bioregional financing facility and how it raises capital and what its purpose is. So that's a little bit I'll share.
Would you mind sharing about? I guess I have a vested interest. I used to work with an organization called the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Alliance, and I know that that has been kind of in an initiatory phase where that's something's happening. Would you mind just sharing a little bit about like what is Asha and why? Yeah, that has been an interesting exploration in implementing these frameworks.
Yes, and I'll share just a couple of slides about that. So, the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Alliance is an alliance of 30 indigenous nations and the headwaters of the Amazon River. So, quite a hydrologically impactful bioregion for the entire world. Sophia did some amazing work with them for more than a year. And they're trying to protect the headwaters that feed the whole Amazon basin. So here's a picture of their bioregion. It spans Ecuador and Peru. And we are working with them to design a bioregional fund to serve the permanent protection of the headwaters. We've got 100-page report laying out what that bioregional fund looks like. And we just got back from a few weeks in the Amazon there with the team, kind of in the nitty gritty of the design, all the complex decisions to be made. But it's important to share that the theory of change involves both creating an indigenous bioeconomy from the bottom up and supporting all the incredible entrepreneurial activity and work to create schools and healthcare systems in the Amazon to support the thriving of those people. And then also at the same time, funding work that attempts to align global incentives to permanently protect that bioregion, including changing policies in Ecuador and Peru, but also engaging in multilateral fora to try to stop the significant extractive pressures that that region is facing. And then ultimately creating a feedback cycle where we demonstrate the efficacy of Indigenous peoples governing their own resources and organizing their own portfolios of projects so that we understand the case for direct financing of Indigenous-led conservation at scale. And there are 5 different windows that the fund will have. So, mostly grants, but also some loans and an innovative financial mechanisms window, which will fund things like the Jaguar biocultural credit that Asha has developed. So that's a little bit about the work there. There's definitely more to share, and we'll be sharing more and probably publishing some materials on that soon.
Awesome. Okay, we have a couple of questions in the chat, but again, I'm going to use moderator's privilege again because I just have another quick question.
Yeah.
I'm, I'm so curious how you really strike me as a bridge from working in very traditional, financial institutions to then being in like the backwoods, kind of hanging out with like local grassroots initiatives. And I guess I'm curious, how has, when you've dipped your toes back into interfacing with more traditional institutions and bodies, like, does bioregionalism sound exotic, or does it make sense? Or what's kind of been the reception of your work in the more kind of classical sphere so far? And what has actually worked in terms of articulating how it really just makes a lot of sense, frankly? I know that's a leading question.
Yeah, yeah, thank you, Sophia. It's a question that's still very much alive for me, and I would definitely say I'm much more comfortable in the forest than like putting on a suit and going to DC these days. But indeed, the work is in both places, and I'm trying to do both. And there are a lot of colleagues from my former life at the World Bank and in DC that are like really interested in this work. And, for some, it resonates more deeply than others. And I have not yet seen that interest translate to money flowing into these bioregional financing facilities. So I think that will be the real test. And really we're just getting to the point where they're kind of like getting up and running and ready to start applying for multilateral funding. But there is an understanding by many people working in these legacy institutions that what they're trying to do is not working. And so I think there's a real hunger for something that is more transformational than what they've tried historically. I definitely speak a bit of a different language when I'm talking to people working in legacy institutions than I would maybe with this audience or with colleagues working deep in bioregional organizing teams. But I do appreciate the work in the in between and in the bridge building.
Cool. Great. It's on my mind as well, so we can collaborate on on
Please.
articulating in the future. Great. Elliot asks, could you expand on the vision of a gift economy hub? Is the idea a physical gathering place to help facilitate a gift economy?
It could be physical, it could be virtual, and really my partner Tyler is the gift economy expert in the BioFi project. Um, and there are some examples that the nonviolent global liberation community has on this, and he's been pretty deeply involved in that community. But it's, I think, just like a pool of resources that a group of people agrees to a certain protocols around gifting for and the purpose of those gifts and who qualifies for those gifts. And the vision is that it takes us out of this kind of transactional nature of relating to money and invites us more into a trust that life will take care of us. And if we're doing good work, that care will flow our way. And he's deeply passionate about that.
Nice. All right, we've got another for you, Sam. Ben asks, would like to hear how you view and address the growing concentration of financial wealth and how or whether it's possible to reverse that trend towards a bioregional aim or bioregional aims without sacrificing integrity and autonomy. It's a big one.
Very good question, Ben. Yeah, Gary Schneider, I've been very inspired by Gary Schneider, um, who said that in its current form, money is flowing upstream. And he was pointing to the unnatural nature of flows in our current economic system, right? Like the more money you have, the more money you can get. And we're kind of in the self perpetuating cycle. I am quite inspired to know a number of people who have either made quite a bit of money through a company that they started or are inheriting quite a bit of money from their family uh, companies or family trusts that don't want to hold that money. They want to give it away in their lifetimes and are making commitments to giving it away in their lifetimes. And they want to use their money to help more people give away their money to regenerative work, to bioregional work. And the vision with bioregional financing facilities is that they would be place-based institutions governed by the people of that place, and they would create kind of a legitimate center for people that are philanthropists to say maybe they don't have to make all the decisions about which projects to give to. They give to the bioregional financing facility, and there's a participatory process for deciding what that financing facility uses that money to invest in, including it could be a flow fund or just small grants or given to different leaders, different entrepreneurs, different culture bearers in the region. So I am seeing a shift in young people inheriting money, but I'm seeing often their parents or grandparents holding on to the money as tightly as they can, and time, to invest that money wisely in a way that can ensure we have clean drinking water, clean, safe drinking water, and healthy food as we're headed for much more intense climate change is closing. So I'm with you in your concern there, Ben, and there's no neat, easy answers to this, but I'd say it's relational work, helping to bring that money down into regenerative projects. It involves kind of getting to know people that have money and care about a place and inviting them to meet the people that are stewarding that place and to be a part of that regeneration.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Okay, we have time for one last question, but fear not, weep not. If you have more questions, again, I'm going to be sending out a blast after this session with links, and feel free to reach out to me and I can connect you with Sam. Sam is also active on LinkedIn. And then we also have the community of practice online, which I have joined several times and learned from immensely. And I have so much fun in those sessions. So this conversation can very much continue. Yeah, to wrap us up, I'll ask a question. Someone says, ooh, do you see any hope here for BFFs to become accessible in war-torn conflict zones right now, especially for women's regenerative care being so interconnected with land restoration?
Thank you, Arzina, for that question. It's a beautiful one. Um, I think there could be a role, and one of the most important things that we've learned is that BFFs need to be place sourced And it doesn't work well if someone from outside the bioregion comes in and says, you guys need a BFF and tries to create it there. Like you really need someone that is in that place, that is holding it down, is the representative of that place, and is the bridge between the capital holders and the land-based work happening there. But certainly I could see in these conflict zones, often kind of small microeconomies pop up because they become disconnected from global supply chains. And so it can be an opportunity to create more of a local circular economy in that place. And I could absolutely see a BFF serving that role and supporting healing, supporting development of shelters for people to live in where their homes have been destroyed. Thank you for that suggestion.
Sam, thank you so much for joining us. You know that this has been on my wish list to have you join Learning Lab ever since this was an idea and a seed. So it means a lot to have you join us. And not only that, but focus on bioregionalism and bioregional financing facilities. It was no small task, but I think we covered it in an hour. So thanks to everyone who joined live. If you want to sign up for future sessions, be sure to subscribe to our Learning Lab calendar, which is a Luma link, which you can find in today's show notes. Be sure to explore the different links and resources that we shared related to today's session. I highly, highly recommend joining the BioFi Project's community of practice. I really love joining their calls. I meet, a super diverse range of folks who are just united by a common interest in bioregionalism. And it's a really fun and interesting and engaging community to get involved with. So with all of that, thank you so much for joining us in the Learning Lab, and we will see you next time.